The Resident Evil 4 remake is here, which is great because I love me a remake. I'm of the mind that video game remakes are essential. A great many games get harder to enjoy the older they get, either feeling primitive and outdated or simply unavailable to play, which a great many titles are, what with them being bound to the dated format for which they were created, now forgotten and lost to the anus of video game history. It's one of the hazards of the medium, I suppose. Could you imagine if it was the same for film? Like if you could only watch Jurassic Park on VHS, forever in the hope it'll one day get ported to DVD? Or better yet, that someone remakes it with better cameras and lenses and more realistic facial expressions. But that's how it be with video games. If you don't still have all your old consoles in the cupboard and you don't dabble in the dark arts of emulation, then you better hope for a port to the latest system, or better yet, a good remake. But none of these problems really apply to Resident Evil 4, and yet here's a shiny remake. So what's the point of it? Why have Capcom done this? Well, Capcom loves a Resi remake. They've been on a Resident Evil remaking tip for as long as, well, let's go through them, shall we? So we've got OG RE, and then that had the REGC Re. We've got RE2 with RE2 Re. We've got RE3 Ni and RE3 Ni Re. No word on RECV Re, instead we've skipped straight to RE4 Re. So after hearing the initial rumours of the possibility of a Resident Evil 4 remake, many people, including myself, felt such a thing would be unnecessary. But here it is. So was that scepticism early doors justified? Is this a worthwhile remake? If we're talking about modernisation in terms of controls and playability, not really. The original still handles pretty well, and that third-person perspective over-the-shoulder shooter shtick hasn't really evolved or been improved upon, either here in this remake or in the wider game sphere. And everybody knows the optimum way of playing Resident Evil 4 is with Wiimote and Nunchuck, but sadly there's absolutely no word on any Wiimote implementation whatsoever, which is baffling. And if we're talking about improved graphics for the remake, sure, yeah, they're definitely improved. But despite its age, the original Resident Evil 4 looks pretty good for a GameCube PS2 title, so I don't think the point of this remake rests solely on a dire need for a visual update, like what could be said of the series' early entries on PS1. And finally, if we're talking about a remake for posterity's sake, that's not really a concern either, seeing as Resident Evil 4 has subsequently released on every video game machine ever made at this point, with physical copies released as recently as 2016 for PS4 and Xbone. So with all that in mind, what's the point of this remade Resident Evil 4? Because what struck me most about playing it was how it made me feel exactly the same as how I felt when I played it the first time. The thrill and exhilaration of the action, the combat fraught and chaotic, the feeling of relief of getting to the merchant, the satisfaction of having a tidy arsenal in the attaché case. The feelings are all the same, it's the same experience. So what am I getting out of this remake aside from a few modern conveniences, nicer graphics, and a few surprises here and there? Now I don't want to get bogged down in semantics, but it feels more like a remaster than a remake. But really, if we do want to get bogged down in semantics, I'd say it's more of a refinement, a revamp. Which is fine, but you don't have to be massively cynical to think the point of this remake might just be a cold hard cash grab. And I think you'd be justified in that cynicism. It's a similar situation to The Last of Us Part 1 remake for PS5. The price tag felt a bit rich for something that doesn't seem to add much beyond aesthetics. And when we think of the original Resident Evil 4, we think of reinvention. Celebrated developer Shinji Mikami wanted to reinvigorate the world of survival horror and diverted the project away from the familiar concept of fixed camera angles and tank controls into fast-paced action. And yes, these creative decisions were met with cynicism also, when fans initially heard that their beloved zombies were being replaced with more savvy infected. But when we all saw Resident Evil 4's infected in action, that cynicism disappeared. The new direction paid off. These were worthwhile changes. Can the same be said about the changes made in this remake? Is this current new video game era one of refinement as opposed to reinvention or innovation? Are we in a limbo phase? Is it a bit like when you can't concentrate on your work until you've tidied the house? Do the developers at Capcom need to tidy up the back catalogue before they can get any new work done? I feel like there are some people out there that feel remakes get in the way of new creations. I guess if you really are against remakes and you fail to see the point of certain titles getting a second outing, all you can do is not buy it. Vote with your wallet, go to the polls with your purse. Trouble is, I'm a sucker for a remake. It's often the perfect excuse to rediscover and relive those great memories of games gone by. What with them being so tied to technology, I love to see my old favourites rejuvenated. It's the reason I rebuy the new Skyrim every year. Because I want to experience a game like it was the first time again, not dulled by age. If I ever wanted to replay The Last of Us again, I wouldn't get the PS3 version, I tell you. I'd get the shiny PS5 version, sue me. And you know what, if you think Naughty Dog or Bethesda shouldn't be farting about repeatedly re-releasing Skyrim and The Last of Us, and should be cracking on working on new stuff, new IP, new innovations, well, new stuff is hard and expensive. Let them have a break by remaking something. I'm not saying it's necessarily easier, but it's familiar. There's a template, a blueprint of sorts. There's not as much risk. Hopefully they're not crunching, laying down the tracks in front of the train on some new gamble. There's not as much worry or pressure or expectation. Taking the finest oak and a handsaw and some nails and crafting the most magnificent table you could imagine is great and all, but sometimes you just want to chill with an IKEA flat pack. Ask any carpenter. And I think it's true of audiences too. Innovation and invention is great, but sometimes we just want what we know already works. The comfort and familiarity of an old classic. Like your favourite old sweater, but now in 4K and with haptic feedback. So in answer to the question, what's the point of this Resident Evil 4 remake? Well, I'm not sure, but it is awesome.